Paris is burning. Not metaphorically, but in the most literal sense. On September 8th, 2025, for the 5th time in just 2 years, another French prime minister has been forced out of office. The streets are swarmed with tear gas, the air thick with anger, and nearly 80,000 police officers have been deployed across the nation in a desperate attempt to contain the chaos. Yet amid the smoke and shouting, there's one truth almost no one is talking about. Years ago, a handful of people saw this coming, and most of the world ignored them. The collapse of France wasn't on anyone's radar. Analysts warned of economic troubles in Italy, Greece, or even Germany, but not in Paris. Yet those who understood the hidden threads of the global economy, economists from Lagos to Dakar, recognized a deeper, quieter fault line that others refused to see. African nations had long been entwined in France's financial web, their economies tied to a colonial-era currency system that quietly fed the French treasury. When those nations began to break away, economists in West Africa didn't flinch. They had already done the math, traced the flow of wealth, and understood what would happen when the pipeline finally closed. Watch Paris, they said, not out of malice, but out of inevitability. What we are witnessing now isn't just another government crisis. It's not merely protests, political scandals, or fiscal mismanagement. This collapse is different. It didn't start in the streets. It began with a referendum held thousands of miles away in 14 African countries, where citizens voted to abandon a currency most of the world barely knew existed. That decision struck at the very foundation of France's post-colonial economy. And when those nations finally said enough, France discovered that its empire of influence had been built on sand. Allow me to demonstrate. 1945, following World War II, France is rebuilding. The nation is in financial ruin. Its industry were devastated. Its dominion is disintegrating. This is a cunning move by France that its former colonies won't completely comprehend for another 75 years. The CFE France is created by it. Now, don't worry if this is the first time you've heard it. It's intentional. This type of mechanism functions best when no one is paying too much attention. Here's how it operates now. This French-controlled currency was required to be used by 14 African nations, such as Senegal, Mali, Ivory Coast, Burkina Faso, and others. Not a choice. Required. The kicker is right here. Up to half of their foreign reserves had to be deposited in the French treasury. Have you gotten that? Half of their foreign reserves had to be deposited in the French treasury. French authorities control half of their money in Paris. Even though you own a firm, half of your earnings must go to your rival's bank account. Additionally, they set your exchange rate. Additionally, they are free to depreciate your currency at any time. France set it up that way. It lasted for 8 decades, 80 years. Why wasn't it stopped? Because the individuals who profited from the arrangement were frequently the same African leaders who had the power to halt it. And until recently, the angry individuals, ordinary Africans, were unaware. This is where things start to get interesting, though. This money wasn't just being hoarded by France. It was being used by them, putting money into it, funding businesses in France, maintaining artificially low borrowing costs in France. Through this technique, more than $850 billion left Francophone Africa between 1970 and 2008. Flight of capital, undercharging, repatriation of profits. Funds that ought to have been used to construct hospitals and schools in Dakar were instead used to construct portfolios in Paris. The CFA franc, however, was only the cornerstone. The actual abuse? This is where uranium comes into play. Allow me to provide you with some figures that will make you furious. For Niger's uranium, France made a pitiful bid. The sum of all uranium sales in Niger? Approximately 100 million euros annually. That amounts to 5% of the national budget of Niger. Now observe the actions of France regarding that uranium. They turned it into nuclear power. 103 terawatt-hours of power were exported around Europe, only within a year. Exports of anti-nuclear machinery and reactors, generating $73.97 billion. Only a year away from uranium. Niger receives 100 million euros, $73.97 billion for France. That's crucial, so let me reiterate it. 100 million euros for Niger, $73.97 billion for France. And for decades, this continued. For decades, it continued. This is the section that should truly enrage you. Niger didn't take this lying down. They made an effort to bargain. Mamadou Issoufou, the president of Niger, made contact with Areva executives and French officials in 2014. That's why I've requested that the conditions of the agreement between Areva and Niger be re-equilibrated, he said. Niger sought to increase uranium royalties from 5.5% to 12%. As you can see, they're still far from getting what they truly deserve. At least it's closer to something equitable. Do you know what France did? French officials presented the demands as unattainable and costly, according to Reuters. They referred to it as unrealistic. France was earning billions. Billions. Additionally, French executives claimed that Niger's request for an additional 6.5% in royalties would not justify their activities. Then production was abruptly suspended by Areva, a large French energy business that operates in Niger. They now referred to it as maintenance. However, everyone was aware of what was happening. Pressure. Political pressure is what that is. So, should we shut it down or accept our attempts? According to one source, France used to set its own pricing for uranium in Niger. And previous pleas for more equitable agreements were written off by French authorities as unrealistic. I'm dreaming. In an attempt to obtain just compensation for their natural resources, they contacted sovereign nations, dreamers. Both in 2014 and 2015, this occurred. France continued to refuse Niger's requests. However, after 2023, something changed. French firms like Total Energies and Urano controlled the exploitation of minerals, oil, and gold in West and Central Africa in addition to uranium. The trick is right here. They pulled methodically, not reporting enough. Suppose you only report 600 tons of uranium extracted from Niger out of 1,000 tons. You export and sell 1,000 tons, but you only pay taxes and royalties on 600 tons. The remaining 400 tons is pure profit. It is sent directly to Parisian shareholders. In the 2010s, investigative journalists in Niger and Chad began to expose these practices. It was verified by supply chain analysts. The disparities were astounding. We are discussing billions of dollars in unreported royalties and unreported earnings. And keep in mind that they were mocked and told they were dreaming when Niger kindly requested to renegotiate. What transpired then when they ceased making courteous inquiries? However, it gets worse. 60 cents of every dollar of foreign debt that entered CFA countries soon departed as capital movement, according to studies. Now, consider that. The majority of the money borrowed by Africa returns to France through agreements, loan repayments, and profit sharing. France may purchase African resources at a discount to market value and then resell completed commodities to Africa at a 20 to 30% premium to international rates. Maximum extraction, no competition, and captive markets. This is where you should start thinking. The greatest economy in Europe is that of Germany. It doesn't use forced reserve deposits or currency manipulation to take advantage of African nations. It innovates, trades, and competes. Germany is prospering and has no power over anyone's currency. The foundation of the French approach is extraction. And in the 2010s, something shifted after that paradigm failed. Smartphones, social media, information availability, and the new generation of Africans who didn't hesitate to pose awkward questions. Youth movements began planning coordinated campaigns in addition to protests. Throughout West Africa, hashtags were used to combat the CFA movement. On camera, activists such as Gemi Seba burnt the CFA franc note in Senegal. He was taken into custody. He then burnt it once more after being freed. And African leaders began to pay attention. For the first time, Patrice Talon, the president of Benin, makes a comment in 2019 that alters everything. It is not good that this model persists in terms of the idea of sovereignty and handling our own finances. That was it. The signal was that reforms were announced within months. Senegal, Chad, Niger, Burkina Faso, and Mali. They called for the withdrawal of French troops one by one. In Paris, they ceased making reserve deposits. Contracts were renegotiated. France panicked as well. Here is what the French government knew that the majority of observers didn't. Not only was France losing its clout in Africa, the banking system that had kept France afloat for decades was disappearing, and a few anticipated it. Hinkle, Jackson, December 2024. Without Africa, he claimed, France would be a third world country. In Sama, think tank, April 2023. France need to be classified as a third world nation. International negotiations, May 2024. If France didn't exploit African nations, it wouldn't be a global force. Cameroonian Guardian Post. Without Africa, France would not exist. This precise prognosis is made by at least 30 to 50 eminent specialists. They predicted that France would collapse between 2000 and 2025, not that it would struggle or encounter difficulties. Now consider why no one foresaw the same outcome for Britain, Germany, or the Netherlands. Because trade, innovation, and competition were the foundations of those nations' economies. Extraction was the foundation of the French economy. Furthermore, extraction is only effective if the other party is unaware of it. They were taken out of. They realized, that is, the year is September 2025. A budget is proposed by Prime Minister François Bayrou. Cuts of 44 billion euros. 2 public holidays are eliminated by free welfare payments. Put in more work and make less money. The public in France loses it. Parliament becomes untrusting. 364 through 194. He's gone. Everything is blocked by them. There is protest. More than 80,000 officers were sent out. Hundreds were taken into custody. Roads are closed. Structures caught fire. What about President Macron? He is in a hurry to name a 5th prime minister in as many years. Here's what's actually going on underneath the surface, though. The public debt of France is now over 3 billion euros. That is an all-time high of more than 110% of their GDP. According to the Atlantic House, France's borrowing costs are higher than those of Greece, which almost went bankrupt 10 years ago. This is where everything comes together. The French energy conglomerate Orano reported a loss of 133 million euros in the first half of 2025 after Niger cut off access to uranium in 2023. Since 2022, the cost of electricity in France has increased by more than 40%. Families are having difficulties. Industries are suffering. 65% of France's electricity was generated by inexpensive uranium. Lost. The secret subsidy that kept France's economy booming for 8 decades was in danger due to the $74 billion in energy and nuclear exports. Stop. Africa refused. France's economic lifeline was cut off when Mali, Burkina Faso, Niger, Chad, Senegal, and Ivory Coast broke down its economic contracts and demanded troop redrawers and their currency deposits. What is the lesson here then? Now, this goes beyond Africa and France. It concerns all systems that are predicated on assumed compliance, exploitation, and extraction. A currency system, trade arrangement, or even a personal connection is not sustainable if it only functions when one party is unaware that they are being taken advantage of. People eventually awaken. They eventually gain access to data. They eventually push back, and the system as a whole falls apart when they do. Africans of this generation didn't wait for approval. It wasn't a courteous question. They planned, they revealed, they called for reform, and they prevailed. Here's my challenge to you then. Which other systems now use the same logic? What other power systems, industries, or relationships are on the verge of collapsing? Consider your own nation, your own area, the partnerships being formed, and the trade agreements being inked. Who stands to gain the most? Who's being told they're getting something in return? What occurs when the truth is revealed? There is yet more to this tale, so please share your ideas in the comments section. France is only the first domino, and you might be even more surprised by the next one. You are in the proper place if you wish to comprehend the actual tactics and the changes in power that impact Africa and the rest of the world. We're diving deeper because the truth is always far more fascinating than the headlines. So hit subscribe, enable notifications, and share this video with someone who needs to hear it.